Today I want to discuss the future of Mr. Tony Chopper, because I think his introduction to the story was one of the most well done of any crew member, with the great Hiriluk flashback as well as Kureha and the Cherry Blossom cannons. But since the time skip, it kind of feels like Chopper has been more focused on being a marketing tool than growing as a pirate. I mean, in terms of strength, he's still using the same form that he got in Enies Lobby, but his biggest power up for it is that he can control it for 30 minutes, before suffering a drawback that rivals pre-time skip Luffy using Gear 3rd. And this is after working with Punk Hazard's Gigantification Specialist. I mean, fights last hours and even days in One Piece, so 30 minutes of Enies Lobby level strength seems kinda lackluster at this point, even compared to other members of the Weakling trio. Nami not only upgraded the climb attack over the time skip, but she now imbued it with a freaking thundercloud that has Big Mom's soul in it. And Usopp unlocked observation haki during Dressrosa. But Chopper does have a Hito fruit, and we know that Luffy has another model of that. So I wanted to take the chance to break down what Oda could be cooking up for Chopper in the future, because I still have faith in the man who was once my favorite crew member, until we met this guy. And a big reason for that is that we all know zone fruits have wills of their own, almost as if they seek out certain people, like how Luffy's evaded the government for 800 years. And this could be why sometimes the awakening takes over the user's mind, and sometimes it doesn't. So I've been wondering what it's going to look like when Chopper finally awakens it, because I think we can all assume that'll happen at some point. Because at its core, his devil fruit is what gave him human level sentience or intelligence or consciousness or whatever you want to call it, and that's what even enabled him to pursue his dream in the first place, which is to cure any disease in the world. Which isn't something we've heard a lot about since we first learned about it. I mean, we've seen some doctoring feats since then, like helping the kids at Punk Hazard, curing the disease in Udon Prison, and then also curing the Ice Oni virus, of course, which is actually a little more impressive now that we have extra context from Queen's involvement with Vegapunk and Mads, in my opinion. But I think a lot of us are looking for more from Chopper. Like, one example could have been curing the Smile Fruits, which we didn't see Chopper discuss whatsoever, but in SBS 105, Oda told us that Chopper wasn't able to cure them, and no such drug exists in the world. And look, I can totally get that he isn't able to cure them yet, but it would have been nice to see him try, right? Like, where is this energy that we saw whenever we first met him? His whole dream is about curing things that aren't normally able to be cured. So I think all of us are just wondering when we're finally gonna see him get closer to accomplishing his dream. And I think I may have found that answer. A couple weeks ago, I searched my computer for a measly 4 letters in a space, which was Doc Q. And the result that sat in front of me literally blew me away, because the result said, Dr. Hiriluk, Quack Doctor. Yes, the Quack Doctor, otherwise known as Dr. Hiriluk, showed up because the letters for Doc Q are within the words Quack Doctor, as in Doc Q could be short for Dr. Quack. And that sent me down a whole other spiral, because Chopper and Doc Q are both doctors of their own crews, and Chopper's dream is to cure anything, while we just learned that Doc Q's devil fruit is all about giving people diseases. And I think a lot of us already assumed that these two would fight each other once the Straw Hats and Blackbeard Pirates finally clash, but as I've said in my videos on Brook and Frankie's fights already, I think every single fight between these crews will have a deeper level to it than simply a position versus position thing or a rank versus rank thing. There will be conflicting dreams, ideals, and even backstories that will make them some of the best fights in the story, as they should be. I mean, Oda's probably had most of these planned out since the beginning, so you know he's cooking. And this Dr. Quack idea could tell us that Chopper and Doc Q both have some connection to the original Quack Doctor, being Hiriluk. And I noticed that Doc Q and Hiriluk also share some physical similarities, like a tall face with long hair and kind of thinned out facial hair to go with it. So what if he is actually Hiriluk's biological son, compared to Chopper, who is sort of Hiriluk's adopted son? But the weird thing about Doc Q is that he's currently 28 years old, but he looks a lot older and more sickly than he should. And it could be fair to attribute that to his disease fruit, kind of like how Magellan had diarrhea all the time, but Doc Q also said that his body has been fragile since he was born. So he's been like this from the get-go and not after he got his fruit. So maybe Hiriluk's terminal illness carried over into his children or something, or maybe he just made his wife sick while she was pregnant with Doc Q in the first place. Not that he meant to, of course, but he was just kind of a shitty doctor, right? Either way, I think this could make for an interesting fight between Chopper and Doc Q, since they both could be carrying Hiriluk's will, except maybe opposite sides of it. Hiriluk didn't use acceptable methods, but he genuinely wanted to help people and wouldn't take any payment for it. Contrast that to Kureha, who studied and had actual medical acumen, but charged an arm and a leg to save people. It's kind of the idea of you pay for what you get. But what makes Chopper so special, and what will probably enable him to achieve his dream in the first place, is the fact that he's taking the best of both worlds from these two doctors. And I think that was illustrated really well with these two panels, where Oda juxtaposed these two ideals by Hiriluk showing that Chopper has the most important qualification by having a big heart, but then Kureha says that a kind heart alone won't save lives, you also need actual medical skills. From Kureha, he learned legitimate medical knowledge, and from Hiriluk, he learned to think outside the box a little bit, that there may be a little more to healing people than simple chemistry and biology, which Kureha illustrated for us in Chopper's send-off with Hiriluk's pink snow, especially when she said, "What wonders fools can create." But this moment showed Chopper that you can even heal the heart of a country, and not everything is done with medicine per se. I mean, even in one of the most recent cover stories, we saw Vegapunk won the Ibel Peace Prize for creating flowers that bloom in gunpowder. He was shooting flowers out of a cannon very much like Hiriluk was, except obviously Hiriluk kind of took a shortcut by turning the snow pink. This is where Chopper learned the importance of rejecting impossibilities, which is what it means to fly a pirate flag in the first place. By combining these lessons from both Kureha and Hiriluk, that's what's going to make it possible for Chopper to finally achieve his dream of curing anything in the world. Converse that with Doc Q, whose fruit would tell you that he almost wants to make everything sickly. I mean, Doc Q and Stronger are based off one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse being pestilence, and that's something I'm going to talk about more towards the end, and that could maybe even parallel how Hiriluk often made people worse off than they were before. I mean, during his introduction, he not only shot the dude's wife with a tranquilizer dart, but administered frog extract that had the guy foaming at the mouth, and then he just dipped. So maybe Doc Q's goal is actually somewhat similar to Chopper's, kind of how Kureha and Hiriluk had the same goals as well. They both wanted to help their patients, but they went about it in much different ways with much different effectiveness as well. Chopper could be curing people the proper way, while Doc Q might try using additional diseases to counteract the patient's current symptoms. And it would probably end up leading to a much shorter lifespan than usual, which I think is indicated by the juxtaposition of Doc Q looking super old despite being 28, and Kureha still being so lively at 141 years of age. This kind of shows us what happens whenever you adopt one of these philosophies with your doctoring. And that brings me to another interesting point about Kureha, which is that we still don't know the secret to her youth, even though she's been trying to tell us since we met her. And one theory I've heard since about as long as I can remember is that Kureha got the immortal youth surgery from the Op-Op fruit sometime in the past. And while that's definitely a possibility, because I mean Kureha has been around a long time, I think it's more likely that it's gonna tie to something that we've already seen an elderly person use in the story, like Lao Ji, who used an ability called Qigong to counteract old age and even bring back strength from his youth. I talked about Qigong in depth in my Lucky Roo video, so I don't want to recap it too much, but it's basically just another form of life return or semi-Qigong, and technically Qigong is a different ability, but they're all very similar in form and function, and it's all about consciously controlling your bodily processes, including aging. And this is interesting when you consider the fact that Chopper is the one who fought the most proficient life return user during Eni's lobby, who was Kumadori. And during that fight, Chopper even said that the power sounds like something he's already heard about before, called biofeedback. So this tells us right away that Chopper had heard about this power even before we were introduced to it. So maybe Kureha has a book on this back in her castle or something, because this might be what she uses to stay so young. Maybe the reason Chopper's heard about it is because Kureha always trying to tell people about it. She could just be so in tune with her own body that she's even able to slow the aging of it by will, as if she can just make the cells slow down their own natural deterioration. For just one possible scientific example, one big factor when it comes to aging in real life is the length of the telomere in your cells. As our cells continue to duplicate over time, the telomere shortens and begins to cause problems that are usually tied to aging. I'm definitely simplifying it as much as possible, but go read up on it more if you're interested. But maybe Kureha was able to manually control this process, and that's why she ages so slowly. So this power wouldn't just be indicative of her strong will, but also how she uses that alongside her medical acumen, because she would need to know what's going on in her own body in order to counteract the aging in the first place. And what's interesting about Kureha is that she's the one who first mentioned the will of D in the story, where she knew that Roger was actually Gold D Roger. So obviously there's something very important going on with her past. So I want to give a quick shout out to Den Kushi, who has a video video coming soon about that very subject, and it even ties to Captain John. I got a sneak peek of the script, so go make sure to check out his channel down below. But during the Drum Island arc, it also heavily emphasized the importance of cherry blossoms, and Hiriluk even said that he was on the verge of death, but was cured in the land of cherry blossoms. So this perfect cure that he's been searching for seems to have some kind of connection to them, and that's why he was researching them for so long, and why he was trying to bring cherry blossoms to Drum Kingdom to begin with. And coincidentally, the place that Roger told Whitebeard about the Will of D could easily be looked at as the place that Hiriluk was talking about, since there were cherry blossoms everywhere. I think Oda definitely had them discuss the Will of D there on purpose, because Hiriluk's flashback ended with him talking about inherited will, by saying that a man is only dead when he is forgotten. It's like the D is never forgotten because of that initial, and if you want to know what the D is, I have a whole section on that in my Lafro Tale 2 video that I just dropped. But this all ties the Sakura trees and inherited will together pretty closely, and right after Kureha shot those cannons, she even looked at Luffy's bounty poster and said that the Will of D lives on. Now, while I do think that we're going to discover an actual cure at some point, and I'm going to cover that in just a second, maybe another way to look at the cure in general is just knowing the fact that you never really die if your will is carried on. Roger as we knew him may have died, but his will lives on through Luffy, kind of through the D-Clan, and even kind of through all the great pirates that went on to search for the One Piece because of him. Which brings us to Blackbeard, who just happened to visit Drum before we even got there. I've heard a ton of good theories for why he went there, but in my opinion, given that Blackbeard has made a career on hunting down devil fruits, I think that's exactly what he was doing there as well, meaning that he was looking for Chopper's fruit. I mean, on one hand, you may think that he wanted it because it had the chance to be the Nika fruit, since that's also a Hito Hito, but Blackbeard seems way too knowledgeable about devil fruits to make that kind of mistake, in my opinion. I have a feeling he knew exactly what Chopper's fruit was, and exactly which crew member he wanted to give it to, being Doc Q. But what good would a human fruit do for a human like Doc Q? Oda told us that if a human ate the human fruit, then they'd become human, or find their true spirit or something. Or another way that this has been phrased is that the user becomes enlightened, which may just be a nod to Sengoku's Buddha fruit, but then he also says that you will live more human-like. Or not. Basically not. Then he runs away. So Oda was clearly non-committal to this answer, and I think that's because it's something we're going to eventually learn about. So what could Blackbeard have potentially been planning by trying to give this fruit to the sickly Doc Q? Well, I think his plan was to cure him of all the ailments he's had since he was born, because I think the perfect cure that Chopper and Hiriluk have been looking for was Chopper's devil fruit all along. It was originally said that the perfect cure was a mushroom found in Drum Kingdom, but what does Chopper's devil fruit look like? A mushroom. And I wouldn't be surprised if Doc Q's sick fruit looks like a poisonous mushroom, furthering the parallel between these two. And I think the reason nobody could find that mushroom was because Chopper already ate it. But what really makes this fruit the perfect cure? I mean, all we've seen it do is turn a reindeer into a walking and talking human, but I think that might be exactly what it would do for someone like Doc Q. I mean, yes, he's a human and he's sort of walking and talking, but humans don't normally come this fragile and sickly, right? And he's even said that it's been that way since he was born. It's not like a temporary thing. So maybe eating this fruit would almost restore him to a more proper human form of sorts. I mean, if it can turn a reindeer into a human, I would have to imagine that it can turn a sick human into a healthy human. And like we saw with Luffy's awakening, which also involves a Hito Hito fruit, he was able to share his powers with Kaido, like by making him stretch into the balloon and the jump rope, which they kind of noted isn't a normal thing. So maybe the awakening of this Hito Hito fruit does the same thing, where you can almost share these human powers with other people, healing them in the process by almost reverting them to a better human state, basically. And I've seen a lot of people discuss how Monster Point is going to be connected to his awakening, so I wanted to make sure I touched on that as well, because I don't think that has anything at all to do with the awakened Hito Hito fruit, and that's because it's triggered by the Rumble Balls, which were said to mess with the fruit's biochemistry specifically. Now, some people look at this as a forced awakening scenario, but humans don't really look like that, right? Why would the human fruit awakening be some kind of giant monster thing? I mean, even if humans can be monsters mentally, they don't physically become that. The Rumble Balls mess with what the fruit is supposed to do normally, so I don't see Monster Point being tied to the awakening outside of the possibility of Chopper awakening and then using a Rumble Ball to create some kind of crazy distortion of the awakening that lets him do some crazy stuff. But naturally, without a Rumble Ball, I honestly think Chopper's just going to end up looking a lot like Vegapunk, because the fruit's most important factor was that it granted sentience sentience or intelligence to Chopper on the level of a human. I mean, us humans are luckily at the top of the food chain, for now at least, and a big reason for that is our intelligence. Like I mentioned earlier with biofeedback, people can spread consciousness even to the tips of their hair, even controlling their own bodily processes, and maybe even reversing aging like Lao Ji was able to do. So maybe Chopper's awakening gives him the intelligence necessary to do this even to other people's bodies, as if he could look at you or touch you and be able to break down what the ailment is and how to fix it. I mean, we've seen him diagnose people's weak points in battle before, like against Ors for example, so it could be that same idea but just on a whole other level, basically brain point to the max. And I think that'd be really fitting for Chopper. While a lot of his character growth so far has been accepting his monsterness, it would be great to end the character arc with achieving some heightened level of sentience or humanity. And having a devil fruit be the perfect cure makes a lot of sense, because how are most cures made in our world? They're either scientific, like, you know, made in a lab, or they grow out of the ground. But that's also how devil fruits are made. I mean, they're either made in a lab, which Vegapunk was able to do, or they grow out of the ground, which we saw with the Smile Fruit farm. And I mean, they're called devil fruits, which would normally grow on trees. So this marriage of technology and nature seems to be how devil fruits were made, and that's also kind of how we make medicine a lot of times, so it makes sense that the perfect cure is also just a devil fruit. I mean, this fruit may have been created by the ancient kingdom with the specific goal of curing people, and that's what made Chopper the perfect fit for it, and why the fruit ultimately chose him with its will, if that is indeed how it works. And this would also be why Chopper is the one to successfully awaken it, because both he and the fruit want to cure ailments from those living around him. And maybe some of you are now wondering how this would tie back into non-humans, and for minks and fishmen and similar races like that, I think it would all work the same as if they were just humans. I mean, the minks said they think of humans as hairless minks, and the point of the blood transfusion in Fishman Island was to show that humans are more similar to fishmen than they are different, I think. So for most life forms, I think Chopper's fruit would just heal them naturally and not turn them into a crazy human form, right? Now for other reindeer or normal fish or birds or whatever, you know, things that aren't quite that sentient like humans are, I'm really not sure what would happen if Chopper uses awakening on them, so let me know what you think about that down below. And now I want to bring up one other important possibility for Chopper that was actually sent to me by one of my members named Matt Cypher all the way back in August. And on the surface, I know it's going to seem kind of crazy, but just give me a chance to explain. But what if Chopper was the forest god, connecting to the 4 gods that we learned about in Skypiea, of course? And now I know everyone wants to rush to the comments to bring up Green Bull. I know, he's definitely a possibility. But one thing to think about is that the only god fruit we know of for sure is the sun god, which is Luffy's, and it comes from a version of a Hito Hito fruit. And Chopper also has a Hito Hito fruit. Now, it seems to be a normal human fruit, but Oda didn't have a problem changing things up for Luffy, so who knows where this thing will go. And I would have to imagine that the world government tried to hide the names of all the god fruits if they do really exist. And Luffy's is the sun god, but he just has rubber powers. You'd almost imagine the sun god would have powers like Ace and Sabo. So to me, the Forest Logia user is almost too obvious for the forest god. And I also have a feeling that if we do get fruits for the 4 gods, they're going to be very unexpected people. And remember, Chopper's fruit was more about intelligence than anything, or human level sentience, as opposed to actually becoming a human, like biologically becoming a Homo sapien. I mean, yes, it's a human fruit, but even in Chopper's human form, he looked a lot more like Bigfoot. It's like it embodied evolution to a degree, like going from a lower intelligence life form to a higher intelligence life form. And that might be why it's called a human fruit right now, because humans are the most intelligent being on Earth, at least in our world right now, until we have aliens come down, of course. And I think the forest is a really good embodiment of that life, or that feeling of evolution, because there's a bunch of different life forms that work together to make that ecosystem. You have the insects, the trees, of course, the animals, and everything else works together to create the forest. You could even say that the sun, the earth, and the rain, the other 3 god names, work together to create the forest. All of it works together to create life. And remember, Hiriluk's entire goal was to make cherry blossoms bloom anywhere, which come from a type of tree. And Hiriluk even said that he found the land of cherry blossoms, which could basically be a forest of sakura trees that went on to heal him. So now we actually have a tie between a type of forest and healing people, which is Chopper's entire goal. So maybe what we eventually see is that whenever Chopper does awaken, he spreads his power to all the life around him, like I was saying earlier, and it turns every type of tree into a sakura tree. The cherry blossoms may not actually be what heals people, but maybe the cherry blossoms are just the sign that the awakened Hito user was there, and by awakening, they probably healed everyone that was there, and that may be what happened to Hiriluk, but he just never knew that. So maybe when Chopper awakens, he not only achieves his dream of being able to cure every disease, he also achieves Hiriluk's actual dream of actually making cherry blossoms bloom anywhere. I mean, one of the first times we even saw Chopper stand up to Luffy whenever he was being chased around the castle, it was because Luffy and Sanji were about to shut the door. And all of a sudden, Chopper got really mad and yelled at them that they better not touch it. I mean, 2 seconds before this, he was running around scared of them, but it was because there were birds nesting on top of the door. In my opinion, this really echoes the sentiment that Chopper could be the forest god because he's all about life. He's all about saving people. And if he really does end up turning a forest into a Sakura forest, because that's just what happens when he awakens, then honestly, I really couldn't think of a better example of a forest god. So now I want to talk a little bit about the fight between Chopper and Doc Q that we're likely to get by the end. Because on one hand, like I said, we have Chopper who's taking both the best worlds from the 2 doctors that he learned from, while Doc Q seems to be taking the worst of both worlds. And like I mentioned at the beginning, Doc Q and Stronger are actually based off one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, being pestilence, which is all about spreading disease, like a plague. And in Greek, they're actually just known as death, which is perfect since Doc Q's epithet is the death god. And like I've been saying throughout the video, where Chopper's fruit is maybe more about life or sentience or intelligence, it almost seems like Doc Q's is about death. Whenever he infected Law with the Milady virus, he even commented how a cure always comes along. So maybe he actually wants to kill people because there is no cure for that. And this brings us to Stronger, because I love a lot of the Stronger theories, like Stronger being rocks, shout out to Parvision. I do think it's more likely that Stronger is just going to be a companion of Doc Q of some sort. And I think they could be yet another parallel to Chopper, because Chopper is an animal that wanted to be a human. Now, while we think Stronger is a horse, he actually has the Pegasus fruit. So maybe Stronger was once a human who didn't like being human, so he wanted to become an animal. So now you have Chopper and Stronger being 2 sides of the same coin, but yet it's a different coin than the one that Chopper and Doc Q are a part of. And since Doc Q can turn men into women and vice versa, maybe he can turn people into animals. And maybe that's the plan that him and Stronger have had all along, because they don't want people to have that kind of intelligence. Maybe they don't want people to find cures for their diseases, or maybe they just don't like humans in general because they were wronged at some point in the past. Whatever it is, I think both of these people can be a reflection of Chopper, and so it'll end up being a 2v1 fight. Except it really wouldn't be a 2v1 because, remember, nobody dies until they're forgotten. So while it may look like a 2v1 on the surface, it's actually a 2v2 because Chopper's always going to have Hiriluk's will with him. And that will may be what made Chopper awaken the fruit successfully in the first place. And Zones also have a will of their own, so Chopper actually has a few wills on his side at this point. And I think an interesting thing to think about is what Doc Q's awakening would be like. I mean, if Chopper's is all about life, like being the forest god, healing people at will, then Doc Q's might be killing people at will. I mean, I know that sounds crazy. He might just have such a strong disease that it just kills you instantly. I mean, remember, he's based off of pestilence, which is all about killing people, like literally ending the world with disease. So I think it would make a lot of sense that his disease almost kills people immediately, and that's what makes the fight between him and Chopper so intense, because Chopper's not only going to awaken and do all this crazy stuff during the fight, but he's also going to know that if he loses, everyone's gonna die, and they're gonna do it from a disease. And maybe whoever does survive might be turned into an animal, which is his worst case scenario. And if he manages to overcome all of that, and he actually is the forest god, it's not bad for a raccoon dog.